Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to our fourth episode, the fourth installment in the Data Leadership Series. My name is Frank Sullivan. I'm going to be your MC, guide, and Sherpa, however you choose to identify with me for this particular day. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce Steve Fisher, Principal Consultant at Ortecha, Stephen Gatchell from Big ID, and John Cook from Dataception. Today we are diving into demystifying data products. Gentlemen, it is very good to see you. I would like to start off with a short introduction from Steve from Ortecha. Welcome, Steve. Give us 30 seconds.
Hey there, Frank. Great to be here. So basically, my background is sort of a specialist in data architecture and data management. I guess in terms of my interest here, I'm not a data products producer or really a major consumer, but as an architect, I'm really interested in developing data product management capabilities and extending those and just effectively supporting the interests of organizations that are using data products.
Brilliant. John, welcome.
Thanks, Frank, and great to be here, and welcome to everyone as well. So yeah, I mean, I've got 30 years in the industry, and it's interesting. I spend my days using sort of data products and data product terminology to actually drive business strategy with the business. And things I've learned from doing data strategy and technology implementations from people like PwC and other consultancies, and writing code and doing AI and all that sort of stuff. So for me, the reason I'm here is because I talk data products on a day-to-day basis, and actually it's for me to drive with the business outcomes and actually get to things that can be delivered that are valuable to them. So that's really where I'm coming from.
Thanks, John. And of course, the inimitable Stephen Gatchell from Big ID. Welcome back, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Frank. Yeah, my interest goes back in the days from when I was a practitioner of creating data products to now working with prospects and customers on what the heck is a data product, right? And I think people have different viewpoints of what a data product is. Is it only monetization externally and generating revenue? But I also think that you have to look internally as well. How do we have valuation around data products and actually have that language internally on the value of those data products and how they can actually be defined and actually implemented to bring value to the company? So super interested for this webinar today, and I can't wait to get into it. Thank you for having me.
It's a hot topic. It's everywhere. And for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to neatly distinguish Steve from Stephen and John from Frank, in case you can't tell us apart. He's my less handsome soul twin. In the chat box here, everybody, I'd like to make it really clear that this is interactive, right? This is not like the usual webinars where it's death by PowerPoint. There will be a little bit of PowerPoint, but that is to support us, the speakers, not the other way around. Not us supporting the slides, basically. So, as a little bit of a warm-up exercise, I'm going to introduce the topic, and then whilst I'm doing that, I'd like everybody who's joining us today, and I can see we've got people as far-flung as New Zealand all the way to Alaska, quite far-flung. So it would be very, very nice to get a bit of an introduction to yourselves in the chat box. The chat box is this little thing, it's a little button with the word chat written on it. If you click on it and make sure that you're sending a message to everyone, not just sending a private message to the panelists, introduce yourself. What's your name? What's your city? And what is the one thing that you want to get out of today as we demystify data products? From the curation side, and wonderful, wonderful people, we have Pete, who is actually the CEO of Ortecha and probably the most knowledgeable dude on data around on this call. He is manning the stand, and along with Tanya and Araminta in the chat. So as you have questions, they'll be able to respond to you, or if you have any issues, pop it in the chat. So I'm going to give us 60 seconds. Leon, I recognize you from the previous webinars. It is a pleasure to have you back. Welcome back. Don't be afraid. I'll go first. My name is Frank. I'm your MC. I'm from Ireland, but I'm currently dialed in from Lisbon. Subra, DB, welcome. Deutsche Bank, Singapore, I think you have definitely the furthest I've seen so far. Okay, So look, over the past 3 episodes, we've looked at 3 really important topics: data strategy, the operating model, and data culture. It's now time to shift up a gear and to get into what was probably the hottest topic rolling around after generative AI at Big Data London, at Enterprise Data World. Really this quarter, what's on everyone's minds is data products. What is it? What the heck is it? Over the next hour, we're going to look at what characterizes a data product. Should it be an important part of your strategy, or is it too soon? We talk about functional versus organizational maturity. We're going to define a data product, what it is and what it's not. Our expert speakers, Steve, Stephen, and John, are going to give us practical insights into data product as we kind of demystify this topic. Too many people in my line of work, in the marketing and communications world, have whitewashed this and stolen, misappropriated the label data product for anything and everything. And whilst technically a data product could be anything from a data model, an underlying data asset, a collection of data assets, if we look at the traditional definition, a self-driving car could be a data product just as easily as a dashboard that tells you what the weather is. So we're going to try and put some constraints around it. We're going to try and help you with the definition and ease into this topic the way Barry White would ease me in on a Friday evening. So let's see who we've got in the chat. Peter from Northern Ireland, enterprise architect and DIKM evangelist. Greco from Mexico City. Wow, we do have a global audience. Stuart from Golden Source. Sandeep, welcome. Matt Halliday, Schroders. Always love the man from Schroders. Keep the pennies moving. Eugene from Bank of Valletta, one of my favorite places in the world. Fergus, Cassie, David Kowalski from Princeton, New Jersey. Welcome, New Jersey. I think you're probably closest to Stephen. Parked his car in Harvard Yard up in Boston. All right. Just so I've set the tone really low now. Now you know what kind of event this is going to be. So let's dive into the meat of the topic. Thanks very much, everybody. So part 1, understanding the approach, right? Job number 1 here is to understand what should we consider when delivering data products. John, you had a very strong thesis around the business outcome. Why does that come first, sir?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, we in data, we struggle talking about value, right? And the value comes up again and again and again. And for me, when I deliver outcomes to my customers, it's that tangible outcome to the business that's always top priority, right? So fundamentally, are you delivering something that's going to make the money? Are you going to do something that's going to save the money? Are you going to do process efficiency? Are you changing their operating model? Are you changing their business model? Are they going for funding? All these sorts of things, the business strategy are really what we're all driving towards, right? Fundamentally, if you're in data and you're not supporting the business strategy in some way, shape or form, then you're providing no value. And for me, the data products and the kind of product management, which is actually, I think, to this point, is actually more important than what we call the data product, but we'll get into that in a minute. Product management is a way of actually delivering to the business strategy. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of actually engaging with internal and external customers. It's a way of building out outcomes. It's a way of valuing things, to Stephen's sort of point in his introduction. It's a way of actually having the process interactively bringing in the business along with you as part of that piece. So for me, that is the product management bit is actually more important than the product, and that for me is the consideration when we start talking about data products. If we're talking about product management, which I believe we should, and I sort of differentiate between delivering outcome value-based products versus data provisioning, which I think a lot of people talking about data products are. That to me is the most important bit.
That's a wonderful introduction into the question of how we should be delivering data products. Start with the value in mind, start with the outcome and work backwards. Yeah. But Stephen, you had a very important point to make around the measurability and the context of these decisions along the delivery path. How would you get to a go or no-go decision? What does that really mean for you?
Yeah, I think in the data space itself, we just continue to generate and store data on a consistent basis, and actually removing data from the environment is very difficult, and risk-adverse people tend not to do it. when you talk about data products and the amount of capabilities behind a data product and the cost of managing data products, you have to really consider and understand what are those go, no go decisions. I mean, just because you have something as a thought process, like we should develop this data product, doesn't mean you have to actually consider it all the way through the life cycle management into production, right? That's one thing around go, no go. The second thing is, once you do actually put something into production, there has to be a continual basis of, does this actually still deliver that value? So do you have the right process in place? And we talk about product management in general, right? But do you have the right process in place and measurable that says this is still delivering the value that we set out to deliver? Or it's not, we need to change it, update it, and then re-deliver it. Or maybe our business strategy has changed and that data product no longer has viability in it, right? So just because it's somebody's baby doesn't mean that we have to keep it going forever and ever. So that go, no go strategy is something that you absolutely have to consider when you start thinking about data products.
And there's always two sides to the story, or two sides of the same Bitcoin, let's call it. Those that produce, and Steve, those that
consume.
Yes, sir.
Rightly. I mean, absolutely. It's something you have to consider. And I think it's maybe quite often the production side is actually the thing that's in people's minds. Maybe a lot of people that do the production are more interested in developing data products as an idea, but for obvious reasons, because I think that data products are a great way of exploiting your data, and data exploitation is absolutely key. But data products also provide a great vehicle for ease of consumption, if you like, of data itself. So it's really a very useful way of actually looking at how you actually effectively deploy data to actually all the reasons for actually using data in particular business case in the right way. Absolutely agree with all that. But products are actually a really good way of actually making sure you get the right data to the right place. And back that up with the sort of the product thinking, which I know that John and Stephen have alluded to, and just using the concepts around lifecycle management, supply chain, highly useful in actually realizing that.
That is an absolute packed answer, I think the three of you. So starting with the outcome in mind and working backwards from where the value is, understanding your go, no-go decisions, putting the problems of your constituent users in context, making it measurable and knowing what success looks like. And of course, designing with intent, taking that product thinking mindset for both consumers and producers and recognizing that it's not going to exist in a vacuum. There is a supply chain in which the data product will live. There is a life cycle by which the product will live and die. And then there's an outcome that has to matter to the business. I think to conclude section one, I'm just reading between the lines and some of the comments from Peter Reynolds. We're going to define a data product for its off-label use. A data product is marketing's great gift to the data team because it's a term that means something very complicated that should be funded. And that's how it's used to get money out of business stakeholders. That's quite funny. Part two, core concepts, right? There is an awful lot to unpack. And I think starting with something simple, right? A data product will have characteristics. But I think one of the easiest ways that we should approach this is thinking, how do we explain a data product to our business counterparts? How do we make them care about it? How do we make them care enough about it to invest or get behind it? And I think tactic number one is just remove the word data from data product. Think of it as a product. Another analogy that we came up with, John, what's cooking good looking?
So I mean, I've obviously thought a lot about this in the last couple of years, and I think if you were to take a step out of data, and you were a company that sold shoes, for instance, would you have to explain the concept of a shoe to your customers? Would you have to explain the concept of the shoe to your investors, to your business? No, because you know those are the products you're selling. Now, you might sell running shoes, you might sell fashion shoes, you might sell a whole different range of different shoes for different customers and different things. But the concept of the shoes is pretty much the same. Now, if I'm a bank and I'm selling mortgages, same problem, but a mortgage looks very different from a running shoe. So in data, I think we do have this tendency to try and, because most data work is about classification, packaging, modeling, trying to put things in buckets, right? Fundamentally, so we have this kind of we seem to bring that towards the product monkey, which I think is actually a mistake, because actually ultimately the product is the output of the project management process. And if you have a product management process, all the stuff you just talked about, Frank, about you shouldn't have to persuade your business that what it is. You shouldn't have to persuade the value, because you've done that as part of the product management process. So if I'm delivering a credit model for a risk department, or I'm delivering an analytics app for an external customer, I've gone through all that kind of valuation process. The product out of it is an analytics app for the customer, but it's also a credit model for the business users. That's all been baked in as part of that process. So actually, what I'm describing as the product should be a very tiny piece of the process, and actually up front, And again, I want to differentiate between, I think we talked about, data provisioning, which what a lot of people data products. The data is one of the ingredients of that product. It's the main ingredient. It's like super important. It's like making spaghetti bolognese and leaving out the spaghetti, right?
Hold up, good sir. Let us not mix our metaphors. First of all, I think shoes are not a great comparison to mortgage products, because the last great innovation in shoe manufacturing was 600 years ago, when they started distinguishing between the left foot and the right foot.
Right.
Products move somewhat faster, right? Let's bring it up a level and let's talk about the overall concept. The restaurant. Let's think of data products as the restaurant. The supply chain is represented by the restaurant. The kitchen utensils, these are the tools by which you're actually going to create the ingredient. Data is the ingredient, right?
One of the ingredients.
The product is the spaghetti. The outcome is a fed customer who pays on time. I really want to get Stephen's take on what are the components of a successful restaurant. And then I want to answer the question, are we building a kitchen, or are we gearing up to build this spaghetti bolognese that John has alluded to? Let's use a restaurant as an analogy for explaining data product, please. Stephen.
Yeah, and I'll jump into that, but 15 seconds here. I think the analogies sometimes seem silly, but when you're in the middle of technology and business, analogies are super helpful, right? So if we take this restaurant analogy and you start with the end product of spaghetti bolognese as the example that we have been using, okay? Somebody that's in the business is going to understand that, because everybody has gone out to dinner with and has received a great meal. And that's what you want them to envision of receiving a data product. Somebody on the other side of a data consumer, to Steve's point, sitting there and saying, this is a great data product. Well, how do you get there, right? And what are all the components? So going back to the restaurant piece, if you talk about, you have kitchen utensils, you have ingredients such as the data that go into it, the pasta, the tomatoes, etc. San Marzano tomatoes are certainly much better than perhaps a locally domestic tomato in theory, if you're Italian like I am. So you have to think about all these things as you're building that data product to say, what am I going to use from a supply chain if I'm buying third party? Is somebody's data set better than somebody else's data set? Restaurants do the same thing. Go down to the dock, buy the freshest fish, or buy the freshest tomatoes from the local farm, whatever. The kitchen utensils. What am I going to use from a data transformation standpoint? What are the best tools to move from source to target and get my data into the right methodology and the right source that I want to utilize for all my data products, right? And that's kind of the kitchen utensils and the process, the recipe. I have a recipe to make that spaghetti bolognese that's been handed down for generations, and I'm going to stick to that recipe. Well, data products are similar in that you want to understand and not lose the focus of your outcomes, right? What is that key outcome, and making sure those ingredients are working towards that outcome, so that instead of making spaghetti bolognese, you don't have plain spaghetti, because it's going to be a little bit boring, right? And just keep going through that life cycle management, right? You're going to go in your refrigerator and throw away the rotten tomatoes. Well, go in your data repository and throw away the rotten, or what we call rot, right? Redundant, obsolete, trivial data. And then you have that outcome, right? And then you got to measure that outcome. I talked about that earlier. In a restaurant, you get 5 stars, right? And you get customers, repeat customers. Well, same thing for data products. If you have a data product out there, what is the adoption rate of that data product? Do you have customers actually renewing and expanding, right? their data product consumption, et cetera. So I think it's a really good analogy when you're talking to business people. Don't confuse them with all of our lovely data terminology and ontology. In 2 more seconds, and then I'll stop. Yesterday, I was in an AI event at Northeastern University, my alma mater. Shout out to Huskies, and a lot of conversation, translating technical to business, extremely important. So thanks, Frank, for the opportunity to talk about that.
Steve, I want you to round off the topic for us here, right? We can talk about lineage, egress, centers of gravity, exchange mechanisms, right? That's not particularly helpful to a business audience. And what we're trying to do is, part of the data leadership series is to help data leaders and senior practitioners articulate the value of things like data product to their investment counterparts or to their business stakeholders. So let's run through this analogy so that they can retell the story, right? And also, finally, I've picked up on something very important, measuring value. This has been a continuous thread on Stephen's point in the chat box. So, Steve Fisher, we're going to play a little game.
So absolutely, the product, if you like, is the meal that's actually served to the customer, and the value or the success of that is whether or not whether there's either a complaint or whether that meal ever gets ordered again on the menu. I mean, there's all sorts of things around the product itself. But I think the restaurant analogy is quite interesting because products don't sit in isolation. There's a lot of underlying, if you like, management and governance around all this. So, you know, how do you know you've got the right ingredients, for example, you know, quality ingredients to do that? If you want to run a restaurant, you're probably going to have like health and safety certificates to make sure you can even operate, for example. So there's a lot of support that's needed to actually make sure that even before you actually start cooking the data ingredients to actually create the product, that you're actually able to do that, and you've got some confidence you can do that with some assurance. So data management, like any sort of underlying management and governance of any sort of operation, so to speak, is really key. It's a silent partner of data products.
You know, we're talking a lot about the anatomy of a restaurant. The kitchen is the producer, the customer is the consumer. What we haven't alluded to are the different models of consumption, right? If you think about it, in the 21st century, there are dark kitchens, right? There are kitchens elsewhere. You don't know where, you don't know how it's been made, but you're still going to consume that spaghetti bolognese. To what extent do you contractually really need to care where it was made? Similarly, there are fancy kitchens, there are bad kitchens, there are homegrown kitchens. What do you think is the importance of life cycle management, right? I'm thinking like a restaurant needs to be cleaned every day or else the health inspector is going to shut them down. What process or what rigor of good data management do you need to apply to this metaphorical kitchen?
I mean, I think I think the bit you're alluding to there was more about supply chain. How do you actually get an instance of a product from, if you like, the source to the eventual target? The life cycle part is really, we alluded to it before, in terms of how successful is that product. So you may have a good idea for what constitutes a good product, and if it's an Italian restaurant, it could be spaghetti, but you don't know that until you actually try that out. So you then deliver it. You could actually execute badly as well. So your actual supply chain itself needs to be supported and governed and managed. But once it actually gets out to a customer, you need to know that it's, in some way, shape, or form, that's actually gone down well or not. So this is I think one of the interesting parts about sort of be aware of the life cycle. It's first of all having a great idea, but making sure that the product itself may either evolve or may need to be removed. There's all sorts of activities that you need to engage in, not on about an individual product and the quality of that, but over the overall success, if you like, of those types of products.
So we're going to play the final round of the game, but this time we're going to involve the audience. The final round of this game is called Exhaust the Metaphor. Right? everybody listening, whether you're dialed in, unless you're driving a car, don't do this because our liability insurance doesn't cover people driving whilst listening to webinars, right? If you are in a safe place and a position to do so, I would like you to help us really drive home the point. What is it about the restaurant metaphor that we can use to explain or articulate data products as a concept? We've gone first. We've said spaghetti bolognese is the product, data is the ingredient, but also we've got a couple of other, deviations from this. The output of a mesh is an ingredient to the bolognese. Good Lord, we could be here for a very long time. I'm going to give us.
I think that's super important. I mean, data is one ingredient of a product in my mind. It's only one. So you have a model, you have UX, you have an API, you have all sorts of other stuff involved in the product. And that's really something that we haven't really sort of dialed in on this, really made that differentiation. I think about the restaurant metaphor is great, but it doesn't actually, we need to connect the dots. I think that's one of the big questions. Is a data product just packaged data? And I call the data package that provisions into the spaghetti that goes in the bolognese, and it getting then a model and and the UX that goes along with it, and the API and workflow and all that sort of stuff. Or is it the actual package, the data itself? And I think that's something we need to really, really hone in, because I don't think I think data is a product at all. I think it's an ingredient.
Yeah, it's a solid point, and you're getting some kudos points from the peanut gallery. How do we distinguish between a data product and data as a product? Right? That's probably a chapter for a book, right? Let's conclude on the exercise. I really like JN's input, and particularly Sandeep. He says metadata is the nutritional information.
Yep.
Metadata could also be the poison label, but who's counting? Isaac, you've got a question. You've raised your hand. Pop it into the chat box, my friend. We're not going to do the Q&A box here. Cynthia, great to see you. The menu describes what the food, the data is. The restaurant ensures the quality. But there's more. All right, 30 seconds. Who can push this metaphor the furthest?
And Frank, while we're waiting, right, we haven't even gotten into the conversation of the delivery mechanisms of data marketplaces or catalogs and all that lovely stuff. So I'm just picking up the menu perspective there, right? And that also could be a whole other webinar for sure.
And when you talk about metadata, and there's loads, I mean, price of the thing, for example, nutritional information, absolutely, I think is metadata. Really interesting stuff. Serving suggestions if it's not in a restaurant, all sorts of things are additional metadata.
List of ingredients, yeah. The data, the standards, health and safety standards, which you get international ones, but you don't get them with data quality. We could do a whole session on that, right?
All right, this is going down a dark hole. From I fear I may never recover us to part 3. All right, I did give you guys some homework though whilst you were researching this. Have you chosen your celebrity chef personalities yet?
Well, you know mine. You told me on mine anyway, so I've just run with it. So Gordon Ramsay.
All right, so Dataception is Hell's Kitchen. Got it. All right, Gordon Ramsay. Steve, did you pick a celebrity data personality?
We sort of talked about Delia before, and I'm probably quite happy with that.
All right, so we've got
the spectrum.
Quite the spectrum there of approaches. Stephen?
Yeah, I failed to figure out who makes the best grilled cheese, because that's about the extent of my chef cooking. So I'll have to follow up on my homework.
Never pegged you as a George Foreman. Just thinking about that grilled cheese,
Has many different ingredients you can add to it. It's very good.
Rachel, fantastic point. Right? Are you making a prototype of your spaghetti bolognese, or do you have to make 100 perfect spaghetti bologneses with 0 failure? Interesting. Peter Reynolds, Heston Blumenthal. All right. We have sufficiently brought that metaphor to its natural end of life cycle. So we're going to sunset part 2 and move on to part 3. The foundations for success. Stephen, you're absolutely right. We need to get on to the exchange mechanism. We need to look at things like the supply chain in the context of a data product. So how can I best explain the value of data products to business stakeholders? Let me start this topic off by saying, is your business ready for data product? Oliver in the chat earlier said, I don't get it. I don't see the need for the word data product, either because he really is a data purist, or perhaps the scale of the company means that it's not ready, right? We talk about organizational readiness versus functional readiness. And these are two competing frictions, aren't they, Stephen?
Yeah, I think the reason why you need a differentiation is because if you treated all data as data products, the amount of investment and overhead that you would have would be an impossibility in every company, right? So I think that's part one. I think the second reason why you need a differentiation of a definition, and again, defining a data product can differ all over the place. I see some standardizations in the chat, right, around CDMC work, et cetera, which is all goodness. Steve Fisher and I both work on that group for sure. But I think you have to set the context for each individual that you're speaking to. So when you talk about situational awareness and maturity models, right, is the company ready to support data products as an example? Well, have they ever done a product in their lives, period, right? Is the first question. The second question is the individual that is in charge of the owner of those data products, can they tell a story that what's in it for each individual that they're talking to? If you're talking to legal about a data product, you better talk to them differently than you're talking to a data engineer about a data product. That's different than you're talking to a finance person. So that comes with the maturity. What is the overall data literacy of the company around data products, around data in general, quite frankly? Do the executives talk about it? Do the boardrooms talk about it? So again, I'll mention the event yesterday in Northeastern, which was super interesting around AI. There was a statistic around 85% of boards out there don't have AI as part of their conversations. 85%. Now, why do I say AI versus data products? Well, because when you talk about GPT, et cetera, those are data products, right? And if 85% are not talking about it, then the maturity level out there in corporate America seems pretty low to me. Did I address the point, Frank?
Yeah, you addressed the point, but I don't necessarily agree with you. I think board members maybe, but board advisors, 85% of board advisors identify as AI and ChatGPT experts. So there are certainly enough advisors out there who've spent at least 20 minutes on ChatGPT. Steve, there are some pretty terrible products out there, right? I remember when we were researching this, we talked about an app purchased by Yahoo for $10 million. You push a button and send a text message to people in your contacts lists with the word "yo."
Yeah, individual product, the value of those, of course, that's actually something you get through going through a proper life cycle process and doing your background, whatever research you need to do. But I think specific data products themselves, it's difficult to say have a particular sort of pronouncement on it. But I think in terms of the idea of data products and the value of them, it's possibly quite simple in some ways, because I think products in general are probably the best way we've actually got at the moment, if you like, for turning resources and assets into something that is actually exploitable by organizations and sort of readily accessible by consumers. It's a sort of general model. And I'm not sure if there's any other way of doing it, because I think that there is a need to actually exploit the data and the asset, and there's a need to actually procure those resources and those assets and the data. So productization and using product ideas is a great way of doing it. So unless there's an alternative that can do everything that productization can do, then to me that's a pretty good argument.
It's comes back to the adage that price is what you pay, but value is what you get, right? When you're looking to articulate the value of a data product, you have to put it in the context of the pain of the user. You know, as a user, I want ... This is a pain. This is the pain relief, or this is the pain prevention, right? So getting data engineers across the team to start thinking with a sort of product design hat is probably really important, because that is what will inform value creation. John, how many times have we been on the end of the only way to extract value from data is to monetize your data?
Yes, I mean that's a whole different section. I think a whole different session on that. I mean, I don't. So I think the top level for me, I don't use the term data product when I'm talking to business people at all, really, unless I at the very start saying we're going to do some data products, and then I don't talk about it at all. I talk about this, the pain, exactly what you're talking about, and what Steve's talking about, the pain that you're suffering, the potential solutions, and we do a value-based assessment based on what they want to do. So if it's external, what's the price the customer's going to pay for it? If it's internal, use things like RICE, reach, impacts, confidence, effort, those sorts of things. We work out what the actual analytics components are going to be. Call them products, but then I don't really call them that. So I worked with a small startup. We were doing credit models. We came up with 3 different products for them. Internally, I work with ops teams working out metrics. These sorts of things. But I don't really use the product term at all. And as I go through the valuation piece up front to determine what to build or what to design or what to do, is this classic product management process, right? You work out the value, and then it's about the potential value versus realized value. And the realized value is the bit that you were talking about, Frank. Did it actually solve the problem? Did the customers buy it? Did it actually reduce we wanted to reduce our operations costs? Did it actually do that? Do we measure it on the back of it? Though, if you go through that process, which to Steve's point is product management, it's class product management 101, right? You do product market fit, you do your unit costs, you do all that kind of stuff, feasibility, prototyping, blah, 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 blah. And then you deliver it, and then you measure it, and then you pivot if it doesn't work. And this is, it always fascinates me when you think, I mean, you use the word data as a product and monetization. I don't like those terms. I don't think they're very useful. Product thinking is exactly what I've just said. And if you're not doing that, that's not product thinking. You're doing product packaging or data packaging. That's a delivery aspect of it. But actually, if you're doing product management, you go through the value before you build anything, before you do anything. That's really the mindset shift that we in data need to do. And one thing I will say, product management is really badly understood outside of data, right? I've been through many market launches of real products to customers, that sort of stuff, and in large and small companies, and it's difficult for the company to get their head around it. In data, it's even more difficult because most data people don't come from that background. And I think that's the cultural change.
So we've got 3 perspectives here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to pick up on Leon's question, because this actually drives to the heart of how we're thinking, all technology aside. Leon says, I'm not convinced that engineers should be the ones driving the need. It should be a pull from the business person. I don't know if I agree with that, but I think it certainly highlights how many people are thinking. They're on the fence. Personally, I think it's a cop-out. I think it's a way for engineers to respond instead of lead. And if engineers, data leaders from deeply engineering backgrounds are able to articulate the value, then they will no longer be second-class citizens on the board, because they are the ones in the driving seat, showing how business needs can be resolved with product process people.
Thanks.
So,
can I do a counter to that? It's very, very quickly. Very quickly. In software, when you're building software products to customers, do the engineers drive the conversation, or is it the product manager? And so why wouldn't it be the same in data with data product managers?
I think there's a subtle difference between who is responsible versus who is informed. I think the product manager is responsible for the pull need, but if the engineer is just there to take requirements, it's like a salesperson just taking orders. What value are they adding to the process?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here, because I think, and this is just from my own past experience here, I think if you don't have a collaboration from the engineering quote unquote side and the business to have shared goals and perspectives, then you're going to miss the mark anyway. So I don't think it's an either or. And Frank, to your point, there is accountability versus execution versus responsibility, all that lovely racy stuff, et cetera. So the way I look at it is there has to be a strategic business need for it that is then going into a data strategy and a product strategy. Those all have to align, and you can't have the business and the technology or the engineering side not both two in the box conversations. And so I think it's both, right? I don't think it leads with just engineering or just the business. If you don't have two in the box, I think you're missing something very valuable there. My 2 cents.
I think the need comes from the business, if you like, at the top, but the ability to deliver, of course, comes from engineering, if you like. So, and they can also provide knowledge about your result, about your data, generally speaking. So, it's a cross-organizational activity, and I think maybe that's one of the things about the Foundations for Success, is actually realizing that this is a joined-up enterprise.
Is there something in the framework or best practices around this, right? I'm thinking like, you guys have been working hard behind the scenes with the CDMC working group. And Steve, I've seen some of your pretty cutting edge thinking on what the supply chain looks like, what the blueprint looks like for how data products move, how they should be bound to local infrastructure. What kind of environment best allows for both the business side and the data side to come together? I think we're not getting painted into we're not getting pushed into a corner where it's very binary, where the business has to come to the need and the engineer has to deliver. We're kind of looking at a framework where actually it's somewhere more in the middle. It's more of a spectrum where business might need some help to flesh out the requirements because they don't understand how it could be built. Or similarly, an engineer has a really good idea, but no idea how to sell it. So what is the framework for getting that balance right between discovery and production?
I'm not sure if we've actually really got to that stage in our own thinking at the moment, certainly within the CDMC. Okay. I mean, I think in terms of...
It's refreshingly honest.
I'm just trying to sort of... I think in terms of how you started the question off, I think what I'm thinking about is, I mean, first of all, in terms of the CDMC work, there's a lot of information around lifecycle management, for example, and what in detail, what sort of considerations you should go through in just progressing through the life cycle. Really quite useful. No particular standard or any particular data product in mind, but generically. I think but in terms of where I sort of thought you were going actually, Frank, was really around, if you, rather than looking at requirements and need, if you actually want to, once you've actually got a data product and it's been identified, any data before it's consumed needs to be actually working in the overall in the local consumer's environment. And so actually, so there needs to be ways of actually, I mean, at the moment we just use files or event streams or whatever, integrate them in there. That in itself is probably still a fairly sort of developmental type of activity. I think if you want the ability of data products, sorry, if you want to start to use data products in a much more scalable way, then those processes of procurement and integration into the local infrastructure probably needs to be automated in some way, shape, or form. And so going forward, I mean, it's not exactly a foundation for success itself, because I think it's obvious that you need to do these things, but I think it should be understood that if you want to go forward, you should start thinking about this, how to improve that particular part of the process of the supply chain on an ongoing basis. That should be a sort of constant target of improvement towards things like automation, and to make it easier for end consumers to actually consume the data much more readily and quickly as well.
So let's borrow from our dear friends in the software engineering world, right? So let's say we're not going to talk about the no-hopers. I don't care to analyze those. Let's talk about those that have potential, those that are maturing, and those that see data as something valuable, right? Let's talk about those profiles of organizations. Let's talk about the beginning, the middle, and the after, right? What happens before, during, and after. Let's use the analogy of an MVP, right? We start off with a one-pager, a charter, a PRD, a product, a data PRD, a product requirements document. Sorry, too many TLAs. Second, we move into a prototype. Third, we move into an MVP. Fourth, we move into a live launch that has its own ops and support cycle, right? So I know it's not a perfect metaphor, but let's look at that as a starting point for how we de-risk the stuff and actually get it done, get it shipped out the door, prove it can work. What needs to happen at the charter level? You're writing your one pager, you're writing up your product requirements document. John or Gordon Ramsay.
Yeah. I'll start effing and blowing in a minute. So this is absolutely right. So we have the same in our process, our product process. We have ideate, industrialize, and then operate. Right, those are the three sets, exactly that. And the ideate thing, we have something, you call it the charter. We have something called data product canvas, right, which is exactly the same thing. And the starting bit is actually not defining the product; it's defining the opportunity, right? Fundamentally, we build this big funnel. You go to the business, say, what's the decisions you want to make? Give me the top 5 that you want to do. Let's go and value them. Oh, actually, that decision is this kind of product, and that decision is that kind of product. Then you break it down into a component product, sort of candidate type things. So this is actually building out effectively the equivalent of your PRD or your and we call it the product canvas. And you come out at the end of it and go, this is what all the analytics components, the products what we call data products, are required to solve that particular business problem. Right, let's prototype them. Let's go and actually run data and all that sort of stuff. And then you go into the industrialized phase, which is the once you prove them out, then you basically put all your policies, all the automation that Steve's talking about, or make it harden them, and then you go into operate, which is all the monitoring and the life cycle. So those are really the 3 areas we talk about. Does that answer the question?
It does. There's so much to unpack there. I wish we had more time. What I wanted to focus in on was what was the starting point for what you're calling the data product canvas. Is it a set of customer problem statements? What is the irreducibly simple component of that canvas, of that chart? For the charter, I would say define your problem statement up front, and then you can run the hypothesis and the validation.
Exactly right.
So
that's exactly it. You ask the business what the key outcomes they want to get, the decisions they want to make. It's all about distilling, trying to drag out the requirements and the things they want to do, because businesses are notoriously tricky to actually give requirements that data and technical people can understand. So it's just taking them through that process to say, actually, what's the most important thing that you need to do? Because a lot of the time, what they think is important actually isn't. Once you go through a kind of structured process and you come up with 4 or 5 things, you value them, the outcomes you just talked about, the key outcomes they want. They could be like, I want to offboard low value customers. If I'm in marketing, I want to increase campaign performance. I want to have an efficient operations team. I want to launch a new product to do X, Y. It's those sorts of things, and you're valuing them, and then you're basically looking at doing a feasibility on the top of it, because part of it might say, we want to launch this product, so you can't do that kind of stuff. So that's the entry point.
That's the entry point. So if that's the before, that's the planning, that's earning the right to prototype it, it's getting people involved, it's kind of crossing that chasm between technical delivery and business needs qualification. Let's talk about the during. Stephen, what happens in the during part? So in between prototype and MVP and MVP plus, what's happening in the during phase?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here. One is, while you are designing it, there's 2 things that have to happen before I go into the design phase. One is the change management perspective of it. You can't write up the charter in a bubble. You have to make sure that you have the right people involved. That's number 1. So there's a communication plan that needs to go into that. The second piece is, to John's point, the outcome has to be defined, but I've seen way too many data products go into a generalization of the definition. That's a problem. It has to be more specific to the outcome. It's like, let's reduce our costs. Okay, cool. Like, what does that actually mean? Like, what costs, right? So because when you get into the actual building of this thing, you want this constant feedback loop and check-in, right? You build a prototype and you say, does it meet that actually defined thing? You go back to that change management and communication plan perspective and say, here's what we have found. Here's why this is good, and here's why this is bad. Here's what's missing and what we need, and actually deliver what we need. So it's this constant churning, if you will, of do something, check, repeat, right? And just keep going through. And then if you don't get the right support, this is really valuable. This is part of that go, no-go decision that I talk about all the time. You build that prototype, you're not getting the right support because you find that either you don't have the right data, you don't have the right support, you don't have the right skill set, it's not really meeting the outcomes that were clearly defined at the beginning. And if you don't get the support at that point, that's where you say, okay, then apparently this is not valuable enough to become a data product in the end zone. So I think that's kind of the middle portion. Make sense?
Yeah, a rose by any other name is just as sweet. I've just seen Leon's comment saying this sounds an awful lot like design thinking. My friend, that's exactly what it is.
Exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Right? Design thinking is the before stage, right? You are validating your assumptions. You have a hypothesis. You have some constraints around the experiment. We are literally talking about the packaging of innovation here, right? You're moving into a production cycle or a development cycle for your data product, where a prototype, okay, you've lost 100, 200 grand, but it's not the 200 million big loss, right? You are capping risk and earning the right to move through those gates as you sort of scale up. So there is a methodology to this. Steve, round us off here. We've talked about the before, which is design thinking by any other name. We're talking about the during, so how we go through that process of maturing a prototype into a viable product, not necessarily, not a minimum viable product, but branching out on viability and making that live and sit and work within the supply chain, the data supply chain that you talked about. What comes after? What does the after look like in terms of aligning release cycles, support, operations? What does that framework look like when you have 100 data products, not one?
Absolutely. I think in terms of, I mean, you have to do for each of the products that you've got there, you need to do the same things. I mean, first of all, you need to be able to effectively ensure that if you like, the source of data you're using are one, absolutely known, and you can keep checking those sort of data sources as well, and also the metadata that's associated with the product. Everything needs to be high quality. So you need to have some level of assurance in the sort of in the middle phase. All this stuff is part of the preparation. Once it's running, you're assuming that preparation has been done properly, and so data products on the whole are actually being created as you expect them to be. There can be a lot of different variations on not necessarily the straight product, but maybe the way it's being paid for. There might be slight variations in terms of particular sort of consumer markets, etc. But in terms of actually putting these things together, building them together, I mean, I think that's to a large extent a significant data engineering project, if you like, or not project, a task, an activity. So to me, the delivery, the last bit is mostly about planning and making sure you really are in a position to go, because you start rolling those things off.
Yeah. And the maturity and maturity. So I'd like to draw everybody's attention, or if you're watching this video on demand, Steve has been doing some cutting edge thinking on this, and he's going to make the research papers and guidance available on ortecha.com/resources. But Steve, thank you very much for that. So realizing now that we've kind of done the Q&A as we've gone along, I'm going to give us a little bit of time now just to get some questions down. Are there any burning questions? Pop them in the chat box now. A simple question that I can read through and pop to our panelists. 60 seconds. Time starts now. This is a beagle in the Ortecha donut. That is the most handsome beagle that I've seen in a very long time.
Chief Dog Officer, right?
Oh, sorry. Chief Happiness Officer, probably.
That's right, yeah.
Chief Marketing Officer.
There we go.
I can tell from the engagement in the chat how much this is top of mind, this topic for data products.
Okay, so I just realized that on the on-demand video, people are going to be getting super bored because they can't see what we see. So product versus solution, is there a difference? Who owns the data in any value proposition? What is the role of design thinking? Can we start small and grow out from leveraging those initiatives that are successful? Has anyone seen an illustration that depicts the relationship between data domains and data products? Can you name one thing, right? As we close off, right? We've got 3 minutes here. I think this is probably the best question. Can you name one thing that is critical to get the most value out of data products? We'll decide that success factor. John, 30 seconds.
It comes down to what's the success factor around any product, right? Does it actually solve the business problem? So if it's external to our customers buy it, if it's internal, does it actually solve the business problem for the business person? Fundamentally, it's the business person assesses the value. Does it solve their problem? And again, it's about the end-to-end solution, not just the intermediate part, just the data.
I have a headache. I took some Panadol. I got the pain
exactly
relief.
right.
It either worked or it didn't. Okay. Steve.
So I think it's you may identify a candidate data product, but can you really deliver it? Can you really deliver it, support it? Are you sure about that?
Is it useful, feasible, viable?
It might be that you can't actually afford to make it. I mean, there's all sorts of you made assumptions about your raw ingredients or your process that don't necessarily get ironed out through prototyping and testing. So you've got to be sure of your capabilities, basically.
Stephen.
Alignment to a strategy, how that data product is going to contribute to that strategy, and clearly defined alignment across the cross-functional teams that agree to what you're delivering.
Does everyone have a common view of what those needs actually are? Right.
Exactly. Part of that change management stuff we talked about.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank everyone for showing up today. This is quite a record turnout for us, which demonstrates that this is actually a hot topic. Our key takeaways here. Number one, apply product thinking to data, yields data products that are valuable, fit for purpose, with consumers and producers in mind. Number two, data products can use the learnings and best practices developed over previous generations, previous iterations in product development to identify and supply quality data products. Third, data products can leverage advances in data and data management in their future development. Okay, skate to where the puck will be. And finally, data products promise to be an enabler to sharing and exploiting data at scale. If you want to learn more about it, dig in, come and have a look, come and have a chat to us. We'd love to talk to you on LinkedIn. Special thanks to the main man himself, Pete Youngs here. Take a quick screenshot of that. Connect with him on LinkedIn, Steve, Stephen, and John. I appreciate your insights. I appreciate the differing points of view as we kind of glean information here. The next event is going to be on the 16th of November, where we're going to be talking about making sense of AI. Yeah.
Small subject, right?
Small subject indeed. So, from me, the Ortecha team, on behalf of Stephen, John, Steve Fisher, thank you very much. Good luck and stay classy.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for a great session, guys.
Take care, everybody.